to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 74 of the Leo Training Podcast. And this week, I have my first returning guest, Sam Loch. Sam was on the show just over a year ago. So we sat down and caught back up. And in that time, Sam's made some incredible achievements and improvements in his own training that he wanted to share with the world. Since then, Sam has deadlifted over 600 pounds, and he set 2 world records on the Concept 2 rowing ergometer. He currently holds the world record for the 1 minute distance and 1,000 meters distance, respectively. He also discusses his new website and coaching business that he's launched, The Watt Farm, as well as a book he's working on that talks about developing power, specifically around the 2,000 meter distance, because it is the blue ribboned event in rowing. So without further ado, let's roll to episode 74 with Sam Loch, The Watt Farm. I'm very excited and pleased to welcome back a return guest to the podcast. I have Sam Loch on the line. Sam, welcome back. It's great to have you on the show again.
It's good to be back, Joe.
Yeah, we got a lot of great stuff in store for the audience. It's been almost a year, maybe a little more, since our first interview was published. So that's actually been one of my most popular interviews in terms of response and downloads. You've been doing some great stuff over the last 12 to 13 months. So I'd love to just catch up with you, get your thoughts on what you've been up to since then, both from a personal training standpoint, and then also what you've been doing on the coaching front too.
So is that May last year or thereabouts when we spoke?
Yeah. Well, we may have recorded the interview a little bit earlier, but I published it right around in May. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I had to go back and actually scroll through my Instagram just to try and figure out, like, okay, what's happened in the last year, which is an odd way of going about it. But I think at the last time we spoke, I didn't have any individual world records on the rowing machine, and now I have a couple. So I've made some personal progress, had some goals, achieved some targets. I'm on the way to hitting some more in the near future. But the last year has just been a continuation of the preceding 14, 15, 20 years. I'm not sure, just trying to get faster, try to have targets and then achieve those. Part of the process is to test myself, but also to try and find effective means of achieving certain ends for myself and hopefully for others who are like-minded individuals. And I think that's on the my personal performance side of things. In the last year, I've also relocated from Adelaide to Melbourne, still coaching high school students, although at a different school. I'm not sure if I was coaching individual clients online or in person the last time we spoke, but I've been doing quite a bit of that in the last year, which is good because for me personally, it's more people that I get to work with, and in more targeted fashion. And I like coaching, so to be able to do that, with more people, different range of people all over the world has been a good and illuminating experience.
Fantastic, man. Yeah, you've been a busy and productive guy for sure in the last 12 to 13 months.
Makes it seem busier than perhaps I have been. Yesterday, all I did was all I had to hang a hat on for yesterday is 1 minute of rowing, because I spent the preceding 6 hours before that in sort of suspended just anticipation and then afterwards been pretty much shot. So it's a certain sort of busy yesterday, but what amounts to a single minute of work in the end. So it depends on your perspective.
Right. No, that's a great way to frame it. Yeah. So in terms of you talk about the targeted goals you mentioned there, and last time we spoke, I don't know if you had a particular goal other than just continuing to get faster and stronger and make progress, but you definitely have one in mind that you've been working on in the last couple of months, and you've been posting on Instagram, and you're targeting going after the world record for the 500 meter piece. So my initial question for you is, what sparked your interest to go after that?
Well, I saw that record. I'm not sure if it was 5-10 years ago. Whenever the records became sort of readily available, when Concept 2 were keeping better track, or at least having somewhere where here are the records. And I remember looking at the 500 and just thinking that's absolutely absurd, and just not even being able to wrap my head around the performance at all. Like how is that possible for a human to do that? And then, gradually, as I've sort of shifted my training and also my capacity, it started to seem like it was conceivable. And then I spent maybe 2-3 months at the end of last year basically doing an entire training cycle with a 500 meter preparation in mind, just to see if, just to basically prove myself that it was something that was achievable. I believe it's achievable for any number of people that are walking the earth at the moment if they're prepared to do the preparation. But I wanted to see if it was achievable for me. And the only way to do that was to give it a go a couple of times. So I went from, I think the last 500 that I did prior to this year prior to this last 12 months would have been when I was rowing full time, and it probably would have been on sliders, and it probably would have been around 116, which is probably equates to maybe a 119 on a stationary erg. And so I didn't have the capacity seemingly at the time, but I was the same organism. So it was always there, but I wasn't stimulating any of those attributes. And so, I did 1,000 meters in July-ish last year. And obviously that was that's a graduated step in terms of intensity and shortness of duration from the 2K to the 1K. And then the 500 was the next step. So I went from 116 or wherever it was, there's basically no starting point, and then to 112.7, and then finished up at 112.1. And 3 weeks ago, yesterday, went 111.4, and then now I've got 3 weeks to try and go faster, and hopefully faster than the standing record, which is 110.5.
Excellent, man. Yeah, I've been following along like so many other folks, so I'm keeping tabs and rooting for you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and I feel the support. The social media side of things is a mixed blessing in a way. Additional support comes additional pressure, but I don't know if it would be any more pressure than if I hadn't told anyone else, like more than the pressure that I put on myself. So I tend to think that on balance, it's a good thing, and something I like when people are excited about erging, because it's a fairly absurd pastime, and I'm right there realizing that this is an odd way to be sort of spending my time, but there are plenty of people that are into it. I'm one of them. So I understand the enthusiasm, and I'm similarly enthusiastic about other people trying to go fast over different distances, male, female. I like people trying to get after it and go faster than they have before, primarily, and then in some instances faster than anyone has before.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, all about just getting better regardless of the distance, just continuing to make strides and progress.
Yeah, sure. Faster than you have gone previously is the most important thing. So, a PR that's exciting, no matter what the relative speed.
For sure. So one of the things I'm curious about. So you talked about 2,000 meters and then the 1,000 meter, and then you've really been focusing your training on the 500 meter distance. So what's been looking back at over the course of your collegiate career in the U.S. at Princeton University, and then also the Australian national team. What's one of the major differences between how that training was scheduled in terms of the volumes and intensities that you were working at compared to what you're doing right now? Because this is definitely, it's a different beast in some ways. It's you are getting to the number as quickly as possible and nailing it the entire time. There's no wiggle room.
Yeah, the mechanics of the stroke are obviously very similar, although there are some slight differences. But the preparation is the major difference. And the high school program that I was in, we did a lot of volume for school kids and went fast because of it. We worked a lot and we worked hard and we were attentive, so we went fast. At Princeton, it was less volume than I did in high school, but on average, more intensity. And then towards the end, knowing that I'd be coming back into the Australian national team system, that was my aspiration. I knew that there would be more volume required. That was just as part of the training. Day to day, it was going to be 2-3 sessions a day, most of the time, long bike rides, stuff that you don't have time for in a collegiate setting. And so I would add in additional volume. So I was doing, the program plus, 50, 75% of extra volume on top of that. Little in the way of additional intensity, but I would layer on additional volume. So that might be extra volume on the erg, or I would take a single skull out before we'd go out in the A, or extra cardio on. Did a fair amount on the Stairmaster at that time, just trying to get used to doing minutes.
Yep.
And also to build up the aerobic system. And because that had worked for me when I was in a national team setting, I insisted on doing additional volume on top of that, because doing extra work had been a method of my success. And
sure.
So my inclination was and is to do more, and knowing that my aerobic system was not as naturally inclined as some of the other guys that I was rowing with, it seemed obvious to me that additional work would be required, that if I simply did the same volume as my peers, then we would improve at the same rate, and that wasn't acceptable to me. Now, if I had my time again, I would not have done that. I would have done the work as prescribed at a higher quality, and then use the additional time to recuperate. And that was a lesson that I had to learn, and now something that I advocate. If when the discussion comes up of things that I would do differently now, given increased knowledge and perspective, then the thing I would do differently is rest more at that time. And so along those lines, since I haven't been on the water much recently, my last race was 2013, and I've been pursuing more of these individual projects and stuff on the erg, ski erg at a time. The emphasis has been on doing that as as efficiently as possible. And so if I can't justify a training session, then it cuts into my recovery. So I don't do it. So I have to be able to justify everything that I do, and I'm not adding in stuff for the sake of it. And the intensity of the work that's required to go fast over 500, you can't simply add in more and more, because just the repeatability is not there. The damage you can create at 110 or 1,000 watts is significant, and so you can't do it that often, basically.
Right. Yeah. So you're definitely, not only recovering, but you're really taking the time to, be more aware of your body, listen to your body, and if it needs the rest, you take it.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. I'm better at advising people to rest than I am at doing it myself.
Me too.
And it's usually a thing that in the end, or over the long term, those sort of personalities are going to achieve more than the alternative. But you have to be aware of who you are, and my inclination is to do more than less, to overtrain rather than undertrain. So sometimes I need to save myself from myself. And if I had a coach, that person would, but I'm my own coach. So I have to, wear both hats, which is just part of the challenge I like. But it is definitely a part of it.
Yeah. It's that discipline sometimes, in trusting, the process that everything's going to work out, that the work you're doing and taking rest is actually going to be, beneficial. And, that's a tough thing, because, when you enjoy training, like probably as much as you and I do, it's like you feel like you're leaving something on the table by not doing anything.
Yeah. I can't train as often as I want to at the moment. Like my natural inclination is to train more regularly, but it doesn't support my goals. So even though I'm training, quite hard, I have 2 full rest days a week at the moment, which is the most rest I've ever taken. And I've gotten the habit now of that's Wednesdays and Sundays currently. And I do some more restorative activities and I engage in those. So it feels like I'm doing something, but, I have these things like that I want to go do, but I have to remind myself if it doesn't support your goals or is not helping increase the odds of increasing the performances in the way that I want, then I simply don't do it. But this is an evolution through making many, many mistakes many times. I'm a slow learner in this regard, and it's only through making some pretty overt mistakes that I'm, convinced now in the manner in which things need to be done in order to achieve the best outcomes.
Right on. Yeah. So the take home message for the listenership is, experience is a great teacher.
It is. And if in lieu of experience, the best way to expedite the process is just to be really attentive to what's happening. I would get caught up in, I'd read and so I had an idea of what best practice would be, but was inattentive to what was actually happening in terms of how I was adapting to the training stimulus. And so it simply was a matter for me of what was tolerable. That was the amount of work that needed to be done. Like, how much could I do? But the important distinction is not how much you can do, it's how much you can adapt to.
Right.
So that's been my shift in focus. Targeted stimulus that provides an opportunity for adaptation, and because that's the point of training itself.
I love that quote, man. I'm writing that one down.
Which quote? I didn't even know what I said. So
it's not how much you can do; it's how much you can adapt to.
Yeah, and I could have stolen that from someone for sure. It sounds like something someone else would say, but
I heard it from you.
Yeah, well, sounds good.
Yeah, that one's great. I think that's gold, that one. So let's get into some of the topics that we had down, and we'll probably circle back into some more specific stuff on the erg. But when you're doing your training, do you emphasize doing your strength training work first or on the ergometer? If so, why do you feel it's important to do the strength training work first, or vice versa? And then do you have a certain amount of time, or do you go right into those sessions back to back?
So I guess we're talking about on a specific day, or for a workout, or
yeah, it could be on a specific day. Maybe you have a block of time on the weekend and you're able to go to the gym, and so you can do the strength training and the ergo at the same time, back to back. Or I'm not sure if based on your schedule, maybe you have to do 2 days where you're doing one session and then the other one later in the day.
Yeah, so for the most part, I schedule the strength stuff first, and the reason is that the erging that I'm doing at the moment, you can't do anything after. That's so it's pick your poison, and these are the training process is many considerations and small compromises. It's a matter of, okay, here's the work that you want to get done, and then how do you arrange it in a way so you can get it done in the best manner possible. And I could think of any session, but say it's 6 250s at near or slightly than 500 meter pace. Well, you can't do anything after that. You walk the dogs, you can lie on the ground, you can breathe, but you're not going to be lifting near maximal intensity or just being able to maintain the positions required to do it well, or generate the sort of velocity or intensity that you'd like to in those sort of sessions. Whereas I felt that you can do it the other way around. For me personally, for most of the people that I coach, once you're in the habit of it, you do the lifting first, and that provides the stimulus. But that's the necessary stimulus. But it's not. You're not trying to demolish yourself in the lifting. You're trying to do everything with quality, and so you're not burying yourself in that session. I rarely think that should be the desired outcome. The lifting is to be done well, not hard necessarily. Mm-hmm. So the key exercises that you need, being mindful that everything you do, especially when it's heavier, creates more of a stress. So it's only as much as necessary. And then once that's completed, I basically get myself in a state of mind where almost like it never even occurred. So I'm not paying attention to some of the fatigue that's already generated at that point. I'm just getting on with what's ahead of me and what the specifics of the ergo session are. And the rest, I tend to keep it fairly short, which is going to be, between 5 and 30 minutes. Because sometimes it's just as long as I take to set up the drag, take some specific warm-up strokes on the erg just to remember how to row again, and then I get into it. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. Sometimes I'll have a break to, go to the bathroom or whatever needs doing just to mentally prepare myself. Mm-hmm. But the only reason I don't do 2-a-days is, where you could segment the work. So the strength session in the morning and then similar sort of intervals in the afternoon or the evening is, for me, that just cuts into the recuperation time. Because say if you've got less recovery time on the front end and on the back end, whereas if you can put those together, then you have a bigger chunk of time with which to rest before the next session. So I tend to train once a day, but it's a couple of different modalities. So that'll be, strength into rowing, which might be 2 to 3.5 hours in the end, where a lot of it is just sitting around either between sets or with some fairly long rest between some of the intervals because of the intensity. But it ends up being a long session, but five training sessions a week at the moment, which easily could have been 5 sessions would have been done by Tuesday back in my previous experience. So it's less volume in a way, but it depends on how you look at it, because some of the sessions themselves are quite long, but the continuous work within those sessions is quite low. So it's a matter of perspective.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, the level of the intensity in those sessions and the quality of work that you're doing, both of those are so high. So, taking appropriate amount of rest is equally as important, because you're trying to just, not only have a great training session every day, but really making sure that every time you sit down, whether it's for the lift or on the erg, you're as fresh as possible in between those pieces or lifts.
Yeah, well, you need to be appropriately recovered so that you can produce the output that you want to, and that's the rest is simply determined by how much is required in order to produce the outputs that I need to.
And is that the recovery time or the rest in between, whether it's for the erg or the lifts, has that changed for you? Like, as you've gotten your fitness levels improved, has that increased, decreased, stayed the same?
Well, for the 500 meter distance, I guess if you think of, say, a heavyweight or super heavyweight, like an elite powerlifter, and how those guys need to not only rest longer between sets, but they, might only be able to deadlift once a week or twice a month, because they can muster so much of their faculties within a short period of time that they can create more damage, which necessitates more rest. And so as you get further along the intensity continuum, and especially if it's absolute intensity, I can simply do more damage in a minute now than I could at any other point, which means that I can, muster more of what I have to offer within that period of time. And as you tap into some of those higher intensity qualities, then the rest is simply necessary. And so it's not a matter, I think, is actually you get fitter, you would think that, maybe more rest is required. But as you get fitter for a short distance, you can go harder, which means more rest, not less rest. Now, if you're looking at a 2K preparation, I think you could look at in some situations adaptations would lead to reduced recovery intervals, but I would tend to opt towards keeping those the same and then increasing the speed during the work as a way of increasing intensity, not decreasing rest.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Cool. All right. Next question. What lifts do you prioritize in your training program, and why?
So I like deadlifting. So this is, I try to find a way to put this in novel terms, but I doubt it will be. I like the big barbell movements, squats, deadlifts. I like rows, chin up, pull up varieties, and then like some counter exercises like bench or potentially overhead pressing, just to balance out the agonist antagonist situation. If you're doing so much pulling, it behooves you to keep some pressing in there, and how much is a matter of debate. But I think the process ought to be simplified rather than complicated, in that sticking to some basic exercises, trying to execute them well, to learn how to do the movements correctly, and then gradually add weight and or velocity over time as a means of becoming a stronger organism who in turn can apply more power for the same effort, basically. So if all else is equal, you're the same individual but slightly stronger, then you'll be able to go faster. Now, sometimes in the search to gain more strength, that is going to either reduce the time that you can dedicate to developing capacity, and so misfocused intentions can lead to decreases in speed by trying to simply get stronger, but it's if all else is equal. So without any decrease in aerobic capacity or lactic tolerance or any number of the measures of capacity, if you can keep those the same and are stronger at the same weight, then you will go faster. I think the shorter the event, the more important it becomes for you to be strong, and that these lifts are a good way of, they do many things. You just be able to coordinate the body, but primarily to develop the strength of any particular individual that then allows them to apply more power or be able to hold position for longer on the erg or in the boat or whatever it happens to be. And so the exercises, there's nothing. There's variations, and that you can go down that rabbit hole, but it doesn't need to be complicated to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Keep it simple and straightforward, and like you said, hit the big lifts, execute with good quality, good form, and use that to reinforce some of the same components that you're trying to do in the rowing stroke.
Yeah, and there's auxiliary exercises that I think definitely serve a place, and especially when you're in the process of learning the movement. For a deadlift, for example, you need to be able to hinge properly, and that's not necessarily something that people know how to do. And so introducing some exercises that are going to better expose what's required in a hinging movement, like a kettlebell swing, for example, is less precarious than a deadlift to begin with, especially with it's a straight barbell. But it's going to give you a good idea of, okay, here's what we're going for. Here's how we need to keep a neutral spine and engage the glutes, how we can load the hamstrings. Mm-hmm. And doing that first as part of the process to learn some of these bigger movements is a good idea. We shouldn't assume that simply because you have access to a barbell that you can deadlift, but realizing that everyone's different and that some of the steps that one person might need to take in order to get to a specific end is not the same thing as someone else. So it's going to be particular to you, your athletic history, the resources you have available, who you have keeping an eye on you, if anyone. And there's also like your specific anatomy and mobility. Yeah. There's many things that go into it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because it definitely there's going to be some adjustments based on the individual. You have to kind of dial and tweak things into the as you would say, the organism.
Sure, and it's when you're training as an athlete in a squad setting or as a coach coaching a squad, then there has to be some balance between giving every special flower the consideration that they need, whilst also not catering to the lowest common denominator, whilst right. also having people not attempt stuff that they're simply not capable of doing. So it needs to be graduated in that setting in a way that it does something for everyone without compromising anyone. And that's, part of the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a fantastic point you made there. You're trying to, put something into the training environment that's going to yield tangible benefits towards better performance for the entire squad, but it's not too challenging for some individuals that it might put them in a position to potentially be injured.
Exactly, because if once you cross that threshold, you can't go back, and then and that's always a consideration. And in some settings, it's going to be some exercises, some modalities are simply more risky than others, and taking the time to pattern those this needs to be a degree of patience, which patience is not my forte, but these are the conversations I have to have with myself, not only for myself, but for the people I coach, that we need to do things right. We need to do it well. We need to have a long-term perspective.
Yep, absolutely. Totally. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes recently is actually from Mark Allen in his book called Fit Soul, Fit Body. But
I assume we're talking about the Ironman.
Oh yeah. But it's be steady yet flexible in your goals. So meaning the goal doesn't change, but if you're working towards something and you have a specific date in mind, and you don't get there on that date, but you end up achieving the goal at a later time, that doesn't mean you stop. Like you keep progressing towards that goal. It just you might not be ready to achieve it. Like myself, for example, like last year I went to bodyweight certification, and you had to do a 1 arm, 1 leg push up. And so I was able to execute it, but I didn't have enough depth. So it took me another 4 months till I was able to hit it. But I just had to work on my weaknesses until I got there.
Yeah, especially in this setting where it's either 0 or 1. For people's first pull-up, for example, the threshold between 0 and 1 is greater than between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3.
Totally.
It can take a while.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably been one of the biggest shifts in my perspective is, I think in some ways it's really important to have dates next to things to keep you honest and be checking in with yourself to see where you are, like in terms of your overall progress. I place sort of, I don't get as high or low. Like if I'm not where I want to be, I just, kind of regroup and look at, my training logs and my notes and stuff, and then make adjustments from there. But I don't take it as when I was younger, I would kind of be very sort of, binary or black and white and be like, well, that was a failure.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Even for this 500 record attempt for me, I have a date in mind, which is May 26th, but my mum was asking me a while ago, it's like, well, what happens if you don't feel great that day, but you feel great the following day, and you can do it any day that you want. So why would you hold yourself to a specific day? And you have to plan for a day, and part of the plan is to have the sequence of events leading up to that rehearsed as well, so you can have an expectation of performance on a given time. But if something changes, I'm not held to that day.
Yeah.
In a scenario like a regatta or crash bees or most competitive environments, you have to show up and perform
on the day
at a particular time. But when that's not the case, then that's not the case. It's simply a matter of, are you ready to do it now? No. Okay. Well, then when are you? And it might just be something that you have to keep attempting till you get there.
Yeah.
And that's going to be when it's going to be.
Yeah. And I totally think that's going to happen for you. I think it's going to be like one of those days where, and I know you've had plenty of them where you go in and you just you feel like you're going to, rip the handle out of the flywheel or rip the bar off the floor. You feel way stronger like the
Yeah.
normal. And those are great days. Those are great days.
And I think part of the process for me is to try and get to a point where I can create those days or increase the likelihood of that happening. But we're biological organisms prone to variability, and so this is what you hope for, and then there's reality, and I hope those are as close as possible. But for me, this 500 attempt, I'm 3 weeks yesterday. That'll be the first attempt, and I say first attempt because I hope it's first and last. But I'm considering this like Roger Bannister. He didn't break the 4-minute mile the first time. He had several attempts, and if that's what it takes, I'll have got the Friday and then a couple of opportunities the following week penciled in, and then the week after that I fly to the US, and so there's a window in which I'll have the opportunity, and then that'll close. And this is not the sort of intensity you can stay at for long, certainly not in perpetuity. So there's a window, but it's not limited to a day either.
Yeah.
If that were the Olympic final, that would be the day. It's just a different scenario. If this are even crash bees, or me and 10 other guys were showing up to do a 500 on a particular day, that's a different thing as well. So it's simply being aware of the parameters of the goal.
Totally. Yeah. Excellent insight. Okay. Do you like or do you have a preference on trap bar deadlift versus the barbell deadlift? And do you think one is more appropriate than the other for rowers that are exceptionally tall?
Yeah. Well, I could see it's sort of a leading question, isn't it, Joe?
A little bit.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I have a preference. It's a bit, to me, like maybe my favorite ice cream flavor. There's a few that I'm quite
fond
of, that I hold in sort of high esteem. And I like all the varieties of picking up a weight off the ground. I think the learning curve for trap bar is more palatable and generally easier, just to coordinate the movements to find yourself in a strong starting position. Can be a useful learning tool. And then just particularly for the vertically inclined individuals, it's just the mechanics of it are such that you can generally a stronger position. I think that you should aspire to be able to at least incorporate a straight barbell at some point, but I think that the trap bar is an excellent tool, and especially if you've got the high handle position for a trap bar, so it's even less compromised, and it certainly can serve a purpose. And there's a reason I have one in my garage, even though I haven't used it for the last couple of months. It's simply a matter of circumstance, but it's a useful tool. And all these, a barbell itself, or any variation of these, are just tools with a slightly different stimulus.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, that was great insight. Okay. What are some of the pros and cons that you've experienced when incorporating like the higher drag factor work on the ergo?
Yeah. So I think ultimately it's hard to even discuss drag factor. So I always put it through the lens of it's simply like gears on a bike. Mm-hmm. So higher the drag, the heavier the gear, or the bigger the front cog, the smaller the back cog on a bike. And so for each revolution, you go further, but it costs you a little bit more to turn the pedals. Alternatively, with a lower drag, you get a little less purchase every stroke, but it costs you a little less each stroke. It's not a matter of harder or easier. It's more a matter of gearing. I think using higher drag work as a training stimulus can make the race pace drag factor feel easier. And ultimately, the training program should, a big portion of it is to make race pace feel easy, or as easy as possible. So if you're in the habit of doing your 2K with the drag factor at 130, then doing some work with it at 150, 160, 200 perhaps will make 130 feel easier, especially for people who the different drag is going to affect people just in the way that your motor patterns, your firing speeds, your natural inclinations. So not everyone needs to do this, but I think a lot of the training should just be there to make race pace feel easier and more sustainable. And so as one measure of doing that, that would be a way to you'd incorporate some higher drag stuff at rate, at lower rate. There's many ways to do that. And I think, we're only scratching the surface of some of the options and on how to push these buttons.
So if you were going to integrate like heavier drag factor training for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience, what's a good way to kind of like spoon feed it so that it's like, it's enough stimulus, but it's not too much where like they're going to have a bad reaction to it in terms of it's too much training load?
Yeah, I think to begin with, I would say if you didn't have too much experience, that perhaps not worry about it. Then maybe that's something for when you do have experience. But say, if we push that to the side for the time being, I would say to keep the work intervals short, keep the rate low, be very mindful of being in a strong position. But I would say that should be your focus regardless of drag factor. When I'm on the rowing machine, I'm attentive to the output because I have targeted training speeds, but my mindset is not, I need to work hard. I'm working hard to hit the number. What's the number? I'm hitting the number. I'm thinking, what are the technical elements that I'm working on to hit the number as easily as possible? And the number is simply a byproduct, and I'm focusing on efficiency, rhythm, some technical elements that I need to work on specifically, and then the output is simply there. And that's the case, when I'm at 110, 112, 115. That's my presence of mind, which is not the case when I was younger. It would simply be the number on the split is what it needs to be, and how I get that is beside the point. And simply every stroke was a matter of life and death just to produce the number on the screen, and to take a step back to begin with in order to just reframe what you're trying to do when you're on the machine, especially for the most part when you're training. It shouldn't be this every stroke you're hanging on for dear life. It should be more about technical mastery and something that's going to transfer to a race scenario. So in the considerations for when you're at higher drag, just to bring it back around, is, just to simply move the drag higher than what it is for your normal training, and then focus on technique and let the drag do its work, and not be too attentive to it other than that. You should be thinking about your movements, and then let the rest and work intervals, the rate, the drag. If you need to organize that, then, that's a complicated discussion. And that's one that if maybe you and I are sitting down all day, we could get to a point where like, here's the way that you can incorporate higher and or lower drag work. But it's fairly advanced and I'm still working it out myself.
No,
Still,
yeah.
yeah. It's,
That's great. That was super, insightful. I loved how much you emphasized the focus on the technical aspect and the movements. The numbers are simply a byproduct. That's great. I mean, I just think that's like such a pearl of wisdom right there. Because
and that's, yeah, you go. Sorry to
no, go ahead.
just to cut you off there. It's something I've had to beat into my own head, and even listening to you like repeat what I said, and I'm like, oh, that just sounds like pussy talk, like. But it doesn't. And if as a younger man, if I were listening to this discussion, I would probably just go, yeah, technique, sure, like whatever. But it really is the way forward. It doesn't excuse you from not working your guts out. That's still there. It's just not where your focus is. You're going to work just as hard because you're going to hit the numbers. You're going to achieve the output. This is not permission to go lighter. It's just where your intention is on any particular stroke. How you pay attention to your posture, your breathing, your sequencing, the no extra residual tension in the shoulders, the neck, the face, all this stuff that if you're not attentive to, then your body is simply going to respond the way that it's going to respond. And I think we have an opportunity to exert more control over our form and gradually refine it over time. Outside of any improvements I've made in output over the last few years, the technical changes that I've been able to incorporate to basically to a point where I think my movement is fairly proficient on the rower, although it's not perfect and I'm still trying to make changes. But I think a lot of us, you develop a pattern on the ergo, and then it's simply about faster or slower, doing more or less work, or higher or lower drag, as opposed to constantly refining the movement.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great point, Sam. One of the other things that I wanted to circle back to, you mentioned quite a few minutes ago, but I think this is another important tip you might be able to offer. So when you're doing the sessions, you're going from the strength work into the ergo. You said that you like to just think about the work that's ahead of you that you're moving toward. And you kind of try to reset your mind for the new task at hand. Is there anything that you think about or visualize to kind of switch gears and kind of reset or clear your mind out?
It's not anything it's not like I have any sort of steps. It's practice over time, doing it any number of times. And I think there are plenty of occasions where by the time I got to the rowing, which is the most important part for me, and it certainly has been at other times as well, like that's where the training program is built around. But on a particular day, it's the thing I do second. And to have been able to acknowledge that, yeah, I've done a lot of work already. Like I may have been lifting weights for 2 hours and I'm not fresh, and I'm not fresh from the day before or the day before that. But none of that makes any difference in relation to what I need to do now. And so to accept that it has an impact on your output potentially, or just the amount that you're able to muster at that point in time, but not to linger on, not to get into a woe is me or I'm tired or just any sort of feelings of being downtrodden. And along similar lines is when I'm doing a set of intervals, you say it's 6 times 250, and just because used that already. There's nothing particular magical about that session, but the interval 1 is going to be challenging if it's near maximal output, and you're going to be feeling it after that. And if you're thinking, oh, bloody shit, I've got 5 to go, that seems like quite a bit. But if you just take it one at a time, then it's just 1. And for most 250s, well, it's not really even going to be hurting until probably the last 50 meters. So maybe it's just 50 meters that you need to do. And then, so you've just got 50 meters to do. And well, I can do anything for 50 meters. Right. And then I get a big chunk of rest, and then I'll go through the process again. And so it's the conscious part of you can find all the reasons for why that logic doesn't apply. But you want to steer yourself into making the work that you need to do as manageable as possible. And so breaking it down into smaller chunks, letting go of what's just happened previously. Those are all things you can practice, and then just engaging in the process, and much like the technique, just refining over time. Awesome. These aren't default states. This is taking practice.
No. Yeah. Again, that's, you keep saying, it's practice, but that's a super critical point, because you have to constantly be thinking about that. Like, just taking it one piece at a time, like telling yourself that over and over, and then doing it, and ingraining that habit.
Yeah, and you can look at you can take a gym session, for example, and it might have 6 exercises, and you could be thinking halfway through, say you start off with squats, oh, my legs are tired and I've still got, lunges or leg press or rowing or whatever else is left that day, whilst you're still doing the squats. And you're cognizant of what's to come, but you can't really do anything about that until you're there. And by the time you're there, you might feel better. And by the time you're there, it might be more palatable because you've got most of the work behind you. Mm-hmm. And so simply being attentive to what you're doing when you're doing it, and not getting ahead of yourself, because the burden of the work to come is often worse than doing the work itself. So breaking it down to smaller chunks, you can take it, like a single session for me, if it's, say, 6 lifting exercises and then some rowing, and it might take 3 hours. But you break it down. Exercise 1 is squats. Well, not only can you break it down into just squats, let's not worry about the rest. Let's not worry about if it's 5 sets of 5 and you're on set 1. Well, don't worry about sets 2 through 5. And when you're on set 1, you don't even need to worry about rep 3 until you're done with rep 2. Right. And you don't need to worry about rep 4 until you're done with rep 3. So it's just 1 rep at a time, 1 stroke at a time. Stay with what you're doing. And if you need to have the session design be at an appropriate intensity, so you simply can just give into the process. And ideally, you're going to have a coach that's going to establish the work that's appropriate for you. If not, then you need to be wearing both hats and be mindful of what's necessary, what's achievable, what is required to provoke the necessary stimulus. But as an athlete, your responsibility is to break it into smaller chunks so that you can just be attentive to what you're doing at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely makes it way more manageable. And I like that other quote you had there, give into the process.
Yeah. It's an acceptance. And I think just going through this recent training for myself, there's a certain inevitability to these sessions when, like, there's those feelings, and you call it nerves or anxiety or that trepidation about something that's on the horizon, and that's whether it's a 2K or a 500 or whatever. there's those feelings of expectation, and that's fine because it's meaningful to you. That's why you feel that way. You're perhaps aware of the physical cost that's going to be required, the potential for failure, and all those things are there, and they're not going anywhere. So just accepting the process and the inevitability of this is going to occur, just like the sun is going to rise. These things are going to take place. That giving into it, as opposed to if you fight it, well, it doesn't change the reality, but it's going to change how you feel about it. It's going to make it worse than it needs to be. So, acceptance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit. So you recently, and I'll include this in the write up, but you posted on Instagram. You did 2K, probably, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. At this point.
Yeah. 3.
And I think, you averaged, let's just say mid-20s, somewhere between maybe 23.
25.
Yeah, I was going to say 23 to 25 or somewhere in that range. So sub 6 minutes for 2,000 meters. And so your caption for the image was that this was basically, at this point, this is typical. You could do this any day of the week, typical day of training for you. It was also the longest distance you've done in what, 3 years, maybe 4 years,
something like that. Yeah, that I can think about. I'd imagine you could scroll through when you could probably find something, but I can't think of anything that I've done that's longer, or that even that length. Yeah, it's most of it's much shorter.
So my question for you is, how did that 2K compare and feel to like other ones with this training that you've done recently?
Yeah, it felt really weird. Like it felt long, and I mean somewhere around like in the second 1,000, when my recent experience is that I'd be resting and preparing for another interval. I will be done at that stage,
right? And
just to sort of sit there and just to continue to absorb and like that was the reason to do it is because I wanted to just to be able to stay in it a bit longer and absorb some of the discomfort and work my way through and just have to relax and not fight it. That only shows up in the last 15, 20 seconds of a 500 for me, but for a 2K, you get a longer exposure to just having to stay in it. And the 25 is like, that's, I wonder if, and I guess a few other people as well, if I simply did it at open rate, where the score shakes out to be. I don't know. I don't think I would get linear returns on strokes, the increase in stroke rate for speed, just because of the specificity of my preparation. I think I'd go faster. Maybe you could go faster than I ever have before. But given the lack of preparation for a 2K, I can also, just the residual fatigue that I could, like my days of being able to do multiple 2Ks in a day, or back-to-back 5K time trials. I could drag my ass through that now, but not in the way that I could. And that's simply because I've detrained those elements. And so it ends up shaking out like this fairly interesting performance, but that's simply what I'm capable of at that stroke rate for that duration. So maybe I do another one in the next couple of weeks, and whether that's a step rate, it's unlikely to be an open rate, because if it was an open rate 2K to do it well, that ends up becoming the focal point of the week. And that's not my main, that wouldn't even be my main session. That would just be part of what I would want to do in a week to provoke a certain response. And so everything I do now comes with a certain cost because of the intensity. And so there has to be, and I've mentioned this before on Instagram when people just say, "Oh, why don't you do a 2K?" As though as though that's simply an easy thing to do. To do it well, it comes with a certain cost, and it's generally at the expense of doing something else.
Right.
Which is why it's not such a simple discussion. And even the people that are saying, "Oh, why don't you pull a 2K?" It's the same reason they don't just pull a 2K, because no one just generally pulls a 2K for shits and gigs. It has to serve some sort of a purpose. But I was a participant and also a witness to some of these training sessions as well. Like I do look at that and think, oh, that's, interesting data, the way that shakes out. A sub 6 at 25 is pretty cool. And especially for me that I'm not very tall. So I generally don't thrive at when the stroke rate is below 30, because guys that have an extra half a foot on leg length, you just spin that wheel for longer every single stroke. So for me personally, I was pleased with that, but only in the larger context of the rest of my training.
No, totally. You made a great point a minute ago when you said that when you're pursuing a goal, it's usually at the cost or expense of other things. Specifically, you're talking about right now going for the 500 meter and in the context of the 2,000 meter distance, but that's true in anything else too. I mean, something's got to give if you're pursuing and putting your efforts towards working towards a goal. You can't do it all usually at the same time, especially with what you're talking about, because that 500 meter distance, it has some very specific demands to it.
Yeah, I mean, every performance has specific demands. It's just that, especially as those performances are more elite, then there's just less wiggle room for you have to be specific. It just, in order to get the most out of what you have to offer, the training needs to, like, I could do the preparation now that I could average out the best 500, 1K and 2K possible at the time but I wouldn't be as fast as I could be on any one distance if I did it that way. So I just have no ambitions for the 2K at the moment. I'm interested to know if I just said, okay, set up for 2K, attention, go. How does that shake out? But simply being interested in it, like other people would be interested in it, doesn't justify doing it, because if that was how I based my training, I wouldn't be producing interesting data in the first place.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Excellent point. That's a great point. Okay. So here's the surprise question I mentioned about before. So
okay.
what training have you done overall your entire rowing career that has resulted in you feeling your fittest?
Okay. Well, I guess fitness for me is specific to the goal, right? So fitness for a 1 rep max deadlift is different than fitness for a marathon, although they're both fitness. So would fitness be, I'd say it's specific to a specific goal. So when was I most physically prepared? What training to look like for a particular goal? I would boil it down to any training that exposes you to race, the physiological, technical demands of either a test or a race. So it doesn't need to be at race pace, but it needs to resemble race intensity. So either repeated bouts, if you're looking at 2K distance, and that's going to be what most people are interested in, making 2K speed feel easy. And that's, you take, repeated 1,000-meter pieces or 500s at 2K or 400s or 750s, and the rest is it depends. And how you would do that on the water is a little different than how you do that on the erg. But having race pace be familiar. There's that awful experience where you're warming up for a 2K on the erg, and it's generally a progressive warm up that you take a few strokes, and eventually you get to a point where you're at race pace, the speed that you intend to hold for 6, 7, 8 minutes, but then 5-10 strokes at that split feels really hard, and you're thinking, holy shit, how am I supposed to do that for a full 2K? And that is what I'm trying to avoid at all costs. Like I want for myself and for anyone I coach, for race pace to feel like that is especially normal. It's the reason I can walk out to my garage now, hop on the erg, and immediately go to 110 because my body is prepared. Now it's going to feel like a little funky compared to if I'd done a full calisthenics routine and some sort of progressive warm up, but my body is capable of doing that. And so you can't have all your training be like that. I think there has to be, especially on the water, there's the technical element, which is going to necessitate some drilling, some lower intensity rowing, and then there's the aerobic stimulus, which is necessary for a 2K. But I think we underestimate the value of overspeed work, so faster than race pace, and then aggregating volume at race pace or slightly slower that, so that you can, so it just is far more familiar, not only from a movement pattern, but from physiology, from the arousal states necessary to operate at those outputs, not a matter of it being more is more, but simply what is necessary to, if you're going sub 6, that's 129s. Okay, how amped up do I need to get to sit on 129s? And being able to do it enough so that you can relax, so that you can do it repeatedly in a test or race situation.
No, that was great. Yeah, I like the idea of adding in overspeed work so that when the goal pace that you're working at or your race pace, it feels as relaxed and technically efficient as possible.
Yeah. Sometimes there's just like the firing patterns of race pace are such that people feel like they have the aerobic and the general capacity in order to sustain that numbers, but mechanically it feels unfamiliar because they're just not used to moving at that speed.
Right.
And I just don't see why that should be the case. I think people are worried about, getting into intensity too early is just, I don't think you want to do race distance bouts at race pace year round, but there's nothing stopping you doing shorter than, even if it's 10, 20 strokes, I think you can do that year round as a technical exercise. And then you layer in additional volume and the training process so that you have the capacity to sustain those numbers for a longer period of time. But it's both things. There's the ability to produce the number as easily as possible, and then the physiological and mental characteristics to sustain that number for a period of time, depending on the race distance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. just because there's such a huge power component to the sport of rowing. Like I've heard a lot of coaches, use the phrase it's a power endurance sport, and it's I guess in a lot of ways thought of as a traditional endurance sport. But then when you kind of look at it along the spectrum of all sports, it's not like a marathon. It's not like a Ironman triathlon. You're not racing for 8 hours. It's 6 minutes. So the endurance component is important, but at the end of the day, so is having, tremendous amounts of power to get your bow ball out in front of everybody.
Yes, but it's somewhat related to boat class. It's I think there's more of an incentive. Power I think is more important the faster the boat is. And just the race will be over quicker, so you can apply more effort. It is a shorter period of time. And on the water, there's generally an incentive to get out first, although, the Kiwi pair, most successful crew of all time by most measures, didn't necessarily, they weren't striving to win the race in the first 500, although they were trying to get to the first 500 in a good position. They had enough confidence to be able to basically settle into a tempo they knew that they could sustain and the others couldn't. But there's still an incentive to get out in a good position. And the physiological characteristics that it's such a balancing act, because you need power and you need lactate tolerance. You need, every energy system needs to be firing, and it needs to be, some individuals need more, have some than others. So again, there's going to be differences between if you're doing your own training, and you can be more particular to your needs. If you're a member of a squad, then you just need to do the work that's provided in the best faith possible. And if you're a coach, then you need to create a program that is going to extract the most from the group that you have.
Yeah. That's some really good points there in terms of the different training environments, whether it's individual, team, or squad, and how that's going to impact your progress, and then what you're able to do session to session and throughout the year.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to fitness, and the initial question is when did I feel my fittest, or what was the work that I did? I look to those situations where I'm in a race scenario and someone says attention, go, and you can go hard from the start. You're still feeling good around the 1,000. You can just keep attacking. That you don't have to. There's not that part where you're like, oh, am I going to make it to the finish line? I've had plenty of races like that as well. But those ones where you feel like you could attack the whole way, that's you remember those experiences. I'm just sort of having flashbacks right now of all the times where I've felt like that through the 1,000 meters, as opposed to the times in which you're 10 strokes in and you're wondering how you're going to get to the finish line. And so if the preparation ends up leading to more of the form experience where you're feeling good through the middle, that you're in control of the race, that's the holy grail.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the middle, being comfortable throughout the middle, and having that, especially being able to be relaxed as for as long as possible before the fatigue really sets in. That's so key.
Yeah, well, even when the fatigue sets in, you need to be relaxed. That's especially when you need to be relaxed at all times, even though it's going to get it's going to feel more stressful, and that's when you need to double down on the relaxation.
Yeah,
and whilst you increase in intensity, and that's one of the many challenges of the sport.
For sure. Final question. I wanted to make sure we fit this in. So, just what are some I guess key principles or tenets that you implement? You work with some juniors in terms of rowing and then the strength training, considering. So let me kind of reframe the question. So considering that they're a younger organism, younger individual, they may be beginning to just learn how to lift. So what are some of the considerations that you think are important to keep in mind, to make sure they're progressing and developing well?
Well, I think with younger people, especially younger guys, to have the lifting through a technical framework. So the weight on the bar, it might be more, it might be less, but that's more is not more. More is not a more successful session. It's simply a stimulus, and that executing the movement well is going to serve the role of the activity more than, okay, what's the heaviest weight that we can lift. It's basically saving them from themselves. And I try to remind the guys that I coach that no one here is going to be impressed by anything that you lift. Certainly not me. So let's not get distracted with whether 140 kilos is better than 120. I don't care about the weight. I care about what the weight being appropriate for you, so that you can execute the movement in the best manner possible. And that's not fun. That's not that doesn't really inspire. It doesn't really get anyone that excited. But especially lifting for rowing, lifting's not the end goal. And this doesn't also mean that there aren't occasions when, like, okay, let's see what you can do. But that's certainly not something when you're like maxing out when you're learning the movement is, I don't see the point. I don't see the idea really maxing out for probably the first couple of years that you're lifting. And that's counter to what I actually did. But I didn't have anyone teaching me how to lift. So I didn't have anyone that I didn't know any better. And doing the movement well and then gradually adding weight to the bar as improvements in strength occur. So it's not a matter of aspiration. It's a matter of capability. So if you're doing 5x5 at 135 pounds, and then that's gradually 140, that's an improvement. And the maximal load or the total load is just irrelevant. It's more or less, but it's just a stimulus. And I have to remind myself of this constantly because I want to lift heavier weight. And and in that way, I have a juvenile mindset. So for the guys that I coach, I get it because I was them, and there's still part of me that, yeah, I want to lift heavier weights too. And I like the part of people that they want to lift heavier weights, and you want to provide those opportunities on occasion for people to max out, that whether that's going to be on like a single rep deadlift. I think that it offers more in the way of liability than potential benefits. So you don't want to shy away from. It's a bit like the output on the machine and focusing on technique. That doesn't excuse you from going hard, and you need to be working. Like if you're lifting, then it needs to be challenging. Otherwise, it doesn't serve any purpose at all. But if it's too challenging to the point where it compromises position, then it's simply too much. And so you just being aware of what the desired outcomes are, and then working your way backwards from there, and then having the conversation with the athletes that you coach. And then if you're an athlete yourself, being aware that, okay, if I could say lift 180 kilos today for 3 reps, but it's pretty gross, I get it up, but in bad position, is that better than doing 170 really well? Probably not. It's probably much worse, even though you've gone heavier, and potentially you feel like you can hang your hat on that. because you've gone heavier than you have before and heavier than the alternate options that day, but has it really made you a stronger rower? Has it helped you lay a foundation and go faster at some point in the future?
Yeah, those are the hard questions that need to be asked, but the important ones, because it's definitely taking the long-term view of things and how you're going to mature as an athlete and a person.
Yeah, and I think it has to be a long term. Unless you're very close to the peak of your sport, then your immediate aspirations aren't your eventual aspirations. So you need to be thinking of, okay, what's going to have me go the fastest, big picture, fast as I can ever get, fast as I can get lifetime. What does the steps look like? And if you're young and you're patient, those are bitter pills to swallow. But I think still taking a long-term perspective, more patient in the meantime, is going to lead to immediate results anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And if you're approaching it in that matter, you're being steady, and it's sustainable yet challenging work that, adds up month to month, year to year, over the years. That's going to make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, I think even moving a slightly lighter weight with more velocity and better intention, and more rep to rep consistency is a good idea, no matter how immediate your goals are.
No,
and
that's
something.
I love that. Yeah, I one thing I would like to chime in there. That's a great way to kind of focus on developing like 100% neural drive, just like really greasing that mind body connection, drilling that nervous system to that muscle and making it a really strong impulse. So that's, you can make it a very explosive lift. So that way, when you get to a point where it's a heavier weight and you're grinding, you're going to get through the sticking point.
Yeah. And you want to build good habits, and there's things I'm doing now I wish I'd started much sooner. Like, big part of the reason for, me to be available and want to have this conversation with you, and presumably for you also, is for us to have this discussion so someone listening can get something out of this. And like, I'm trying to have people with similar aspirations to me or similar interests not make all the same mistakes that I did, to hopefully have learned from them so that they can find a more efficient path.
100%. Absolutely, Sam. Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the reason I do it, is to hopefully, other people find value in it, and it helps them along their own personal journey, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, that's all the topics we had down. So is there anything else that you want to rap about?
No, I mean, I can think of a million things, but I'm at this stage, I'm mindful of. It's like it's interesting that I'm super cognizant this morning. Like, no, I'm having this conversation with you, excited about it. Like, this is stuff I like talking about. I have to go sit on the assault bike for an hour. That's what happens. That's the next thing that happens, and I don't do any steady state on the rower anymore. But I have to therefore supplement with some aerobic conditioning, and that usually ends up being the assault bike. I'm not especially enthused about having to do this,
right?
And I think that's a reminder, as well, that not every aspect of the training phase is going to be equally exciting to you. It's a matter of, like, it has to be somewhat palatable in order to increase the odds of adherence. But sometimes the work that needs doing is just what needs doing. And so I have to, even though yesterday was a milestone of sorts, I need to, the work continues. And so that's mindset. My mindset at the moment is I need to go sit on that contraption and give it a whirl. and that's what I need to do.
Fantastic, man. Well, I'm sure you'll have a great session and stuff, and hopefully we had some good energy, good vibes, get you going before you head off to the bike.
Well, having these discussions, it's always a good reminder for me. Like most of us, I'm selfish. I tend to freely admit it more than most, but for me to have the conversation about best practices is a reminder for myself to continue to operate in this manner, because I'm just like anyone else. I'm prone to doing the things that I want as opposed to the things that I need, to default into some natural instincts, which some of the stuff we've talked about is to safeguard me from doing those things, and therefore things I recommend to other people. So, this is a good opportunity for me to make sure that for the next 3 weeks, as I've got some fairly earnest training coming up, then I follow my own advice. So I hope that all you listeners have got something out of this, because I certainly have. And
thanks, man.
Thanks for getting back in touch with me and making the time to have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my pleasure. If there's anything I can do to help to support you on your journey and stuff, let me know. But just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye offline.
Yeah, okay. No worries.
I hope you enjoyed that brand new episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you felt the content was valuable, please take a moment, head on over to iTunes and drop in a 5-star review. Or head on over to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn and be sure to share it on your favorite social media network. And be sure to tune in next week when I drop another brand new episode. This time, I sit down with Paul Taras Volkovinsky and we discuss Indian club swinging, Persian meals, the jury, and mace training.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.